welcome to the NBC Charlotte Sports podcast. I'm Nick Carboni. Of course, big one this Saturday in Chapel Hill, North Carolina Duke Part 2. Again, unfortunately for us all and for Zion, it looks like he will not play, but it's still a top 5 matchup. Could help either team with a 1 seed in a few weeks, but of course they got to get through the ACC tournament next week here in Charlotte. Excited for that one and excited for this podcast. I called up former Tar Heels All-American center Eric Montross, who is in his 13th season as the team's radio color analyst now, and he's seen so many of these games as a broadcaster and as a 4-year player, but the most memorable for everyone, of course, getting bloodied by Christian Laettner back in '92, Carolina getting the last laugh in that game, taking down the defending national champion Blue Devils, and rushing the court at the Smith Center. Here's my conversation with Eric Montross. All right, Eric, you've seen a lot of UNC Duke games. I don't even want, maybe you have a guess on how many, but I never get tired of hearing from a player's perspective what it's like to be in one of these games. So what is it like to play in this rivalry as a player?
I would say that to try and make it personal to anyone who's listening, I would just say whatever your richest experience is from a competitive standpoint, whatever that is, however you've competed in your world, just it's that and then some. I think that's the greatest thing about being a player in this rivalry is that most years you're going up against a player who is as good or better than you are. And so as players, what you want to do is to play against that very best competition. You get it in the ACC, but then you get an even more micro level when you're playing against Duke.
All right, so it looks like no Zion for Duke, but how have you kind of seen their team come around since what happened at in Durham against Carolina and losing him?
Again, I'll go back to saying that everybody wants to play against the best players, and he is their best player. And so I think that if you're Carolina, you want to play against him. And it's not that there's not a deep sense of appreciation for the fact that the rest of the guys are terrific. I mean, they've got All-Americas, they've got 4 first-round draft picks, they've got all kinds of other setup and explanations of talent and experience. Not necessarily at the collegiate level, but the talent is off the charts, and so that's something that everyone hopes that he will play, and my hope is still that he makes a miraculous recovery and comes out and is able to play, because I think that would be terrific for him to be able to experience what Carolina Duke is like, other than being from the sidelines, and I hope for his team, because they need him. But I think the Duke team has really changed. I mean, you've seen that, and you would expect that. It doesn't mean that they're a bad team. It doesn't mean that they're a subpar team. But what it does mean is that they're trying to adapt to having a guy who, between he and Barrett, it was almost a negligible difference between their averages. I think 22.4 and 22.6 or something like that before his injury. And they're trying to figure out how to hold that gap together. I think that they really miss him on defense in the back of the zone, in the back of their man-to-man. And I think that team is still trying to answer some questions. So, hopefully they'll continue to improve. You would expect that under Coach Krzyzewski, they're continuing to make pretty good-sized lesson plans and adjustments to get better each day, because he's been around and he's a Hall of Fame coach.
Let's talk about some Tar Heels, of course. LeBron James not the only one to pass Michael Jordan in scoring this week. Kobe White surpassed his freshman scoring mark of 460, I believe, against Boston College the other night. So how impressive has he been? And everybody kind of puts it into context of where he fits in to a Carolina freshman season. But how impressed have you been with Kobe White?
This summer when we went to the Bahamas it was a kind of overseas trip that you're allowed once every 4 years in a preseason. I was there and I watched him, and I talked to Phil Ford later, and I said, Coach Ford, because Phil coached me as an assistant. Yeah. So I said, Coach, where does Kobe rank coming into a freshman year? And he said, well, he's a heck of a lot better than I was coming in as a freshman.
Wow.
And you know, I mean, again, that's watching a snippet of a young man at that point. The point of that is that he's been terrifically impressive. Whether he'll measure up in the legends of Carolina freshmen as being that good, who knows? But what you love about Kobe, and I think what I am most impressed with, aside from his numbers, are two things. First and foremost, his competitiveness. He is competitive on both ends of the court. He doesn't take defense off ever. He may not play perfect defense all the time, but his effort and energy is there. He celebrates his teammates. And the second thing is, so those were kind of 1A and 1B. The other thing is that when you look at how he's matured over the season, you love to see a player who takes lessons and constructive criticism, both from failures against players within the ACC, or in the case of Carolina, they had a terrific preseason schedule. You know, he got some fat lips from that. I mean, he got popped a few times, and I don't mean that in the literal sense, right, but I mean just from a standpoint of being a freshman, he took some lumps, and he took that, and you could almost see him making mental notes of how to keep from having that same situation pop up again. And then just as a freshman point guard at Carolina, I do think that there is, it's a very difficult decision or a position for a freshman to play, because you are the floor leader. You are the one calling offenses, defenses. You have to know where everyone is on offense, and you have to know how to correct them if you call a play and see someone out of position. So it is a thinking man's position at Carolina, and I think that for him, he's adapted very well, and then started to really infuse his ability to create offense within that.
Yeah, so I mean, the old adage is you need a veteran point guard to win the tournament, to win in March. Has he kind of come to possess some of those traits that you need to lead a team all the way to a championship?
Well, we'll see, won't we? Yeah. I mean, I think he's got a very good complement of players, which, again, that helps him. And so when you look at, 4-year players and Kenny Williams and Luke May, who are complementary starters, he's got Garrison Brooks has played extremely well in his role position in his sophomore year. You look at Cam Johnson, who is another mature player, only having been at Carolina for 2 years, but he is really playing well. So all of that diffuses some of the attention on Kobe, which has allowed him to grow and to have some success and not be the guy that gets double teamed every time down the court. There have been instances where he has, and sometimes it's rattled him, but inevitably his teammates are able to disperse that pressure and force the other team to back off, because they are also scorers and they are also legitimately very talented players. So again, I would just say that who knows what will happen as they head into Saturday against Duke. Who knows what they will do in the ACC tournament and beyond, but they have pieces that are making them better than they were last year. And for a long time, my question was, are they going to be able to win without shooting the ball really well? And in the last 5 games, they shot the ball at 65% versus Wake Forest as a team. So it was one of those off-the-chart performances. We saw Virginia do that the other night and shoot, incredible numbers. But what Carolina now has done is they've not shot the ball very well from the field as a whole, but they've also had one of those 5 players, and include Nasir Little into that mix, who have had 20-point or better games, or 30-point in some cases, with Kobe and Luke and Cameron, who have all had terrific performances in that set of 5 games since Wake Forest, when the team has not played as well as they could, but they're winning ugly. And that seems very cliche, but the defense is starting to turn offense, which is when you really see the marks of a good team.
Luke May is a guy that's from our area. He's a guy that we've followed really closely throughout the years. Works really hard, puts a lot on himself. What have you seen from Luke this year. And do you ever kind of talk to him about, being at that position, being at North Carolina, and you had a probably similar experience?
I've been very fortunate to have a good, close relationship with Luke, and it's really not revolved as much around basketball. I mean, obviously that was a key cornerstone, but however people view him as a successful basketball player, he's a better young man. And I think that to me, now at my age and my position and the work that I do, not just in the broadcast capacity, but fundraising for our student athlete scholarships at Carolina, that to me is really more important than what he does on the floor. But the fact that he can couple terrific All-America type performances on the floor and still have that reverence that people speak of him as an individual and as a young man, that's something that I know his family is extremely proud of, and he should be, and I believe he is.
Just a few more questions. If Carolina is going to make the Final Four, what do they need from Nasir Little?
Well, Nasir has been also extremely positive for the team. He's had a terrific attitude at a time when a lot of people had expectations that were kind of a la the Duke freshman expectations of what he would do coming in. But I think internally everybody recognized, and Nasir recognized, that there was a lot of veteranship between him and 30 minutes a game, or between he and 30 points a game. And so as you watch how Nasir has progressed, I would also argue that he, like Kobe, although he hasn't had as many of the big time kind of front headline performances as Kobe has, he's starting to really learn how to play within this team, and when he comes in, be an exceptional asset for them. So I think Nasir is really hugely important for the team's success. It would be kind of a la the Marvin Williams role as sixth man coming in 2005 when Marvin was highly talented, ended up going number 2 in the NBA draft, and was always content to come off the bench and play a very important role.
All right, Eric, we'll get you out on this one. Fill in the blank for me. North Carolina beats Duke on Saturday if?
It's a big if. I think that the answer to that will be if Carolina shoots the ball in the mid 40% range. And if they do that, then they must play defense and turn the ball over, win the rebounding edge. The other scenario would be that they shoot the ball at a plus 50% clip, and that simply outfires the fire that Duke will bring. But it's going to be an exceptional game any way you slice it, and we look forward to that competition.
So speaking of the ACC tournament, Montrose still tied for the most ACC tournament victories by a Tar Heel with 10. Did that alongside his teammate Derek Phelps, and also just recently Joel Berry. So up next we go to Duke. Got to have equal time here. We talked to David Shumate, who's in his second season as their radio play-by-play man, taking over for the legendary Bob Harris. Talked a lot about the game, and I was fascinated to know what it was like to be on the call for Zion's Shoegate. Here it is. You prepare for every game, and there's so much preparation that goes into what you do, but some of the biggest moments are things you cannot prepare for. So I'll ask you about two. We'll start with the Wake Forest game the other night, and that ball hitting every part of the rim, but just not going through the net. And then go back to Cameron when Zion goes through his sneaker. Take me through both of those moments as a broadcaster, and what's kind of going through your head as you're trying to make those calls.
Well, you come prepared, and it's one of the, and I know you use the word, but it's one of the reasons, I go to practice so often. It's another reason that you do so much research. It's another reason you learn one about the program. Case in point, North Carolina. Let's talk about that first. The game with Zion Williamson. I had pages and pages of notes about the history of the series and the great moments on the rivalry and all that stuff, and you get to none of it because immediately things change and you're relying on your knowledge of who's on Duke's medical team? What does it mean when they walk to this part of the building so that I can relay what's going on? Where, the shoe broke. What are the implications of that? I mean, those sorts of things completely changes the storyline, maybe away from the game to what's going on with him. And then you've got to rely kind of just on the knowledge that's in your head of, when Zion Williamson missed a half against Florida State, when, the things that happened with Duke against Syracuse and the implications of that when Trey Jones got hurt. Going into the game, that wasn't the storyline, but that became the storyline. Very, very similar to Wake Forest. You go in prepared for a bunch of different things. And maybe on a night when Duke was a really heavy favorite, you go in and it becomes a competitive game. And now you're relying upon your research of the great games in this series and stuff like that. So there's just a bunch of different stuff. And this, and anyone who's in this industry knows this. When you prep for a game, you probably only use, 30 to 40% of the material you prep on the actual broadcast.
Last Zion question, when that all happened, everybody kind of wanted to make his decision for him without really knowing him as a kid. So peel back the curtain a little bit for us. What is your Zion Williamson experience been like? And was there anything about him that surprises you?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that people forget in this, just big picture, is that he is a kid. You see the incredible athleticism and the very unique talent that he is. And there's obviously, implications for that in terms of the NBA and what happens after this. But I think people forget in that, and it gets lost, that he's just having fun with his guys. And it's infectious. He and RJ Barrett are really good friends. Those freshmen are very close, but he's close with everybody on the team. And that's what gives this team kind of a unique chemistry. And I think that gets lost in some of the discussions about injuries and what's going on at the next level, and, the potential for, financial gain at the next level and stuff like that. I think that's not talked about enough, is the quality of the person he is. He's obviously a very unique talent. And I think some of the conversations that are happening on the side are just a product of the day and age. You know what I mean? Everything's rapid reaction. Everyone's got a hot take. And generally the most controversial one is the one that floats to the top and gets the most attention. So, I know there was a conversation going on about, should he play again? But that was never really a conversation that was had by anyone who matters, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Talking about his best bud on the team, RJ Barrett, what have you seen him go through since Zion went out, and how special of a player is this kid? You've seen a lot of talented players from a lot of different schools over the years, but what does he kind of bring to the table that's unique?
His physical strength. I mean, when you see him, he looks lean. He's a little over 200 pounds, but his ability to, because, he is the primary mark for anyone who's trying to slow down Duke, and they just can't. He's the ACC's leading scorer. He's already set the freshman scoring record at Duke with still a good chunk of the season to go. The ability for him to get inside and finish through contact, I think, is very underrated, because that's his game. He drives, he finds ways to get to the basket. He has incredible feel around the basket for the angles he needs to use the backboard, but also with runners. And the other thing, too, is, a lot of tension this year has been on Duke's shooting, right? And the three-point percentage in particular. He's one of the more clutch shooters I've ever seen. The percentage, the averages, people can pick apart whatever they want to, but when it's in the moment and when it's needed, he's got an incredible stroke, and he's just got that coach calls it verve. Coach Chester calls it verve. That it's just something that makes him a little different, and makes him a big weapon for Duke. And the consistency with which he's played with. I mean, he's scored in double figures in every game this season, and I think it's like 21 or 22 of them, 20 or more. I mean, you kind of take for granted the consistency of his scoring. And people say, what's wrong with RJ if he doesn't go for 25? Versus for any other collegiate team, if someone goes for 25, you're probably talking about a new career high anytime they do it.
Well, he's certainly a great candidate for ACC Player of the Year, but many would submit that even with all this missed time, Zion is too. I won't ask you to make a prediction on who's going to win it around the league or at Duke, but could Zion still win League Player of the Year despite missing this last handful of games?
Well, Well, the great thing for me is I don't vote for it. So I would go for Co. I mean, it's hard to pick between those two. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out because those guys have had such a tremendous impact. Talk about the consistency of the scoring for R.J. Barrett. He also is way up there in the league in terms of assists a game. That doesn't get talked about a whole lot. But, Zion has the plethora of everything you want to look at. And the eye test with Zion is overwhelming for people because they haven't seen anything like that. And they've had their moments this year, right? I mean, Barrett had back-to-back 30-plus point games for Duke. One of those was against North Carolina when Zion Williamson went out. One of those was against Syracuse in the first game after when Duke won at the Carrier Dome. But Zion Williamson was the guy that sparked Duke's big comeback at Louisville earlier in the season. So, I mean, slice it however you want to, but we're fortunate to have both of them.
Best way to get out of a shooting slump is to shoot your way out. Where's Jack White at these days as we head into this game Saturday?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was talking with associate head coach John Shire about that, who's obviously a tremendous three-point shooter in Duke history. And they always keep talking about, and they actually talk about this kind of all the way through Jack's struggles, was in practice, and when he's open, he's about a 50% three-point shooter. And eventually the law of averages are going to even this out. And that's kind of the terminology the coaches use. And you can kind of start seeing that after he missed 28 in a row, didn't get nearly as much attention, that he made 5 in a row. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of those things that it was odd. And I don't think there's any question that it was something that Jack was thinking about at times, because you could kind of see the weight come off his shoulders when he made one. But, maybe everything equals out and maybe he's primed to go on a run here in the ACC and into the NCAA tournament because he's a good shooter. And the thing that was interesting to me during that streak, and we were talking about this a lot during the broadcast, we follow it every step of the way. 10 of those misses were against Syracuse in the first meeting, but of the 28, it's not like they were way off. You know what I mean? Like It was just a hair. So you could get the sense that if one went, that the rhythm was going to click in. It wasn't like he'd lost his stroke totally and, they're clanging off the backboard and they're way off. It was just right there, and it was just a matter of seeing it go through. And God knows I'm not a shooter, so I don't know what that feels like. But
same. That's why we're both behind a microphone right now. So
it feels like they get into a rhythm. Normally, I'm on the other extreme. When it goes in, it's kind of anathema to what's normally going on.
Same here. I think a lot of casual fans, when they watch the ACC tournament and then the NCAA tournament, are probably going to watch Duke. And after they kind of get over the shock and awe of RJ and hopefully Zion, are going to go, who's that point guard? I like him. What does Tre Jones bring to this team in terms of a team that very likely could be in a Final Four as a freshman point guard?
Well, I'll talk about 2 angles. One, what he brings to Duke is a floor leader. I mean, he is without question the guy who runs the show on the floor for Duke. There's just a calming influence when he's out there because it gives other guys the freedom to go do what they do, whether that's RJ driving and scoring or Cam Reddish, locating his shot from outside and getting his chances to play one-on-one if needed. And, guys inside, Bolden, a chance to post up. It just puts everything kind of where it needs to be offensively. But maybe what Tre Jones does more so is on what he does to the opponent. And I say that in that he drives them crazy. The way he can attack the primary ball handler, the way he can affect your offense to where you can't really even get it going. If you watch teams play against Duke, particularly the last couple of games, Miami and Wake Forest, they're down to 10 on the shot clock before they even really get going into their offense. And that is a product of Tre Jones. And, yes, you might throw some shots up and they'll go in. That's the game. But consistently, that's going to wear on you. That's going to be a problem. And what he does is he takes the primary ball handler, instead of, head up, looking around, running their offense, they have to turn their back because he'll take the basketball away. And imagine trying to run your offense with your back turned to the basket. It's just a totally different challenge. He's shut down scores like Pons and Likes. And for my money, he's right there in terms of the National Defensive Player of the Year. He is just such a huge asset and one of those things that maybe doesn't show up in the box score, except for the fact that Duke is 26-4, and he deserves a lot of the credit.
Get you out with a few more questions. I'd hate to have to pick ACC Coach of the Year every year. I mean, there's so much talent just on the sidelines in this league. What can you tell me about the job that Coach K has done this year with a unique set of circumstances coming in with the guys he brought in, and then everything kind of just getting disrupted in that first Carolina game?
Sure. I mean, I think Coach K doesn't get enough credit for what he does and what he can come up with. You think about, one, you're starting with a new roster every year, and everyone's going to say, well, yeah, but it's incredibly talented. No question. But you have to get that talent to gel and be able to work together and buy into a system. And he's done that. And I think this statistic, more than anything, tells you everything you need to know. Duke's played 17 games in ACC play. For a grand total of 8 of them, they've had their entire roster. Whether it's Zion missing a half, Cam being sick, Trey being out, now Zion being out. And to be 14-3, and all 3 of those losses in ACC play were one of those games where people are out. The Syracuse game at home, obviously, where Trey Jones got hurt, and then the North Carolina game where Zion Williamson got hurt, and then the Virginia Tech game without Zion Williamson. So Duke is 8-0 in league play with a fully healthy roster, and pretty good as well without those guys. So, I mean, 6-3, I think, without when they're having to deal with someone being out. So that, to me, tells you what you need to know about him. Having to revamp the team over and over again. I remember, after Trey Jones got hurt, everyone's saying, well, Virginia's coming in. Virginia's this juggernaut. Duke's got no chance. And Coach K invents this weave offensively and changes some subtleties defensively, and Duke beats Virginia. And then Duke goes on the road and beats Virginia. And look what Virginia's doing to people. They just torched Syracuse the other night. I just don't think he gets enough credit. And in some ways, that's a credit to him, because when it goes well, he's the first guy to, push his players out there to grab the success. He normally only steps in front of things when they aren't going well, which to me is what makes him such an effective head coach. And one of the reasons that players really buy into what he does, because they know he's got their back.
And just curious, what has it been like to work with Coach K these last couple of years? What were your thoughts coming in? And I mean, were you a little nervous to be around him that much? I mean, the star power is pretty intense.
Yeah, I don't think nervous is the right word. There's a layer of respect there, I would think, for anybody to be able to work with him, what he's accomplished. And the thing that struck me is, one, how welcoming and nice he can be. And also, two, that this kind of subtle sense of humor he's got that's a little dry and sarcastic that a lot of people don't get to see. He's really funny. He's fun to be around, but it's also, outside of the interpersonal relationship, it's a treat to be able to go to practice and watch him teach. The way he can figure people out and read people and know what they need at that moment is probably one of the things that makes him elite. And it's incredible to watch him work. And a man that, at times can be one of few words, can get a lot out of young people. And it's incredible to watch him work. But he's been incredible to be around. With everything he's accomplished, he doesn't need to give access to people if he doesn't need to. But he hasn't, he's been very welcoming to me, very, very honest and easy to talk to. And it's been great. I mean, he's a legend, but he's also just a great human being.
Fascinating stuff, man. I'll get you out on this. Typical TV guy question, fill in the blank. Duke will win if.
Duke will win if they do a good job of getting back in transition on defense, and also hold their own on the defensive boards with North Carolina. Luke May obviously had a tremendous game when they were over here, and Cam Johnson is a dynamic player. But I think those are the two areas, or the two focal points, at least, if you look at adjustments from the first game to the second game, are going to be the ability to get back in transition and take North Carolina out of those easy baskets. But also, they are so good crashing the offensive glass. You have to mitigate that some way. Otherwise, it can get away from you.
Many thanks to Dave and Eric, and to you for listening. Should be a great game Saturday. We got Kelsey Riggs headed up there, so check out our coverage on WCNC, and we'll have much more NBC Charlotte Sports podcast coming at you shortly.